So today I want to talk about a little bit about Remix, which is a full stack React framework. So I stumbled upon Remix maybe a year ago. Not sure if it was back that far, but just what I really want to highlight in this page is that you really are using just native HTML components. So as I'm building in Remix in general, I spend a lot of time on the MDA or the MDA Mozilla website, just looking at how actual HTML works. And so this is kind of a little just demo app that I spun up. It kind of talks about API. That's going to really be the highlight of our talk today. And can you guys see this top zoom bar in anyone's way? Not sure if you guys can see that or if it's only on my screen. But so in general, Remix React frameworks have come up with great ways, great technology to create projects. So I don't really want to go into that, but if you wanted to go into it, you can check out the documentation, or the command to run is npx create remix at latest. And this is going to give you a guided walkthrough. And so what I started from in this project is just the bare bones remix project. And so you're left with app directory, and then you have a routes folder, or roots, I guess, depending on what side of the world you're on. And they use file-based routing similar to Next.js. I'm sure some folks have heard of Next.js and the framework wars, so to speak, that are going on right now. And out of the box, it comes with some Tailwind styling. So this is styled via Tailwind. And this kind of goes into what an API is. I don't think that I really need to cover this in any way, shape, or form. So I'm just going to jump into it and show you a network request. And you can see this is Postman. I'm sure folks are familiar with Postman. And I'm going to make this network request to API/user/get, right? And this is the body that I'm sending with the request. So when I hit Command Enter, you can see that this is the response that I got back. Right. So let's go examine what we did and how we did that in code. So in our roots folder, we have api.user.get.tsx. And this syntax for this is new to Remix v2, the dot notation syntax to get nested routing. This is a feature flag that I have active in this project just because it's what's coming next. So you can also not use this dot notation, and you would just use folder notation. So in my routes folder, I would have an API folder and then a user folder and then get.tsx. And so I want to talk about this code here, and let's kind of ignore these two functions for right now. And what I want to talk about is this action function. And what this action function does, in any Remix component, you can have an action function. And when you make a post request to the route, this bit of code is ran. And so what we're doing here, when I make this post request, is we're grabbing the body out of the request. We're awaiting turning it into JSON. We're also grabbing the headers out of the request. And then we're grabbing the authorization token out of the headers. So you can see here in Postman that I just put a fun my bearer token, yay. But what you would actually want is a proper bearer token. And then if there is an authorization, or if there's not an authorization token, we throw an error, right? So if I were to remove this bearer token and send my request, we get no authorization header. So we're unauthorized. So now we split our bearer token. This is pretty common to API authorization, how you get the bearer token. And then if there is no token in the split, we say no token provided, status 400. Is that what I said? No token provided. We return a status 400. And then if we have auth, we're going to await our authenticate token, which really is just a dummy method. I have it defaulting to return true, but what you would probably want here is logic to authenticate. authenticate your token against a user database or any of that manner. So here is a whole bunch of error handling, right? We want to return something if we're not authorized, if there's no body, and if no user ID is provided. So what's that mean? So the body is the actual request that we got. If we come back to our request, just add a token back. The body that we sent is just an object with an ID and then a random ID. So if they're authenticated, if there is a body and if the body has an attribute of ID, then we await get user by ID, right? So again, this is just a mock method that's going to return an object. But what you would want to do here is have your logic to go to your database, search for a user by the ID that was provided in the body, and then return that. This JSON method is just a helper method that Remix provides. And I'm really not, I haven't dug in a whole lot as to what the JSON method is actually doing. Yeah, I guess I should have, especially to give a talk. So now that we have our authentication method, we can rerun the request and you can see that we're authenticated, there is a body. In our body, there is an ID token. The authentication token that we provided was valid, meaning that we ran our dummy authentication token method, authenticate token method, and it returned true. So it progressed all the way to the end of our function. And now this is, in my opinion, a great way to build an API. I mean, you can have no UI whatsoever, and you've stood up an API in just a few files. So another great advantage that we can leverage with Remix is this is a route that has a default export, right? And this is just the API route. So it's just api.tsx. And it's using file-based routing. So this function name is irrelevant. We could call this whatever we want, call it ASDF. It's the default export from a function. And so what we get when we actually navigate to API is this page, right? Just some pretty simple Tailwind style typography, really. So now how would we combine the two? Well, there's a function that's similar to action, and it's called loader. And what the loader does is this is going to run before your route mounts to the DOM. So when we go to, what's this file name? Docs. So we would go to just docs. We would actually be able to see this component, right? But before it mounted this component, this bit of code ran, and then it returned message hello from the loader. And then you can see in the loader, there's another method function called use loader data. And this does accept a type parameter. If you guys aren't using TypeScript, you can just ignore this, but it's by default typed to any. So you can access this message property from this object. And then what this is great for, in my opinion, is that it really avoids the loader wheel. You're not, and it doesn't even so much avoid the loader wheel, it avoids me as a developer having to manage the loading state and figuring out if I've started to fetch, if I'm in the process of fetching, if I fetched, and if it was successful. It's kind of abstracted a lot of that logic out of the component itself. And now I do that in the loader. And all of this code, even though it's in a front-end file, is only server code. So when this is code split at build time, it's going to look for these action and loader functions, and it's going to rip them out. And you're going to be left with just this front-end code. And now if we go to docs and pop open the console, you can see that we got a console log hello from the loader. And that's the message that I actually went and fetched and passed down to my component to render. So you can really see the power of being able to run server functions so we could fetch data from a database, DB or API, have that data packet ready and then send it to our component, use loader data to actually pull the data out. And then we can build our components with that data without ever having to manage any type of loading state. and our API and our documentation, they coexist. You know, you can have your API in an API nested route, but your code for each are on the exact same project. Did anyone have any questions?
A couple questions in the chat. I'm going to address those.
Oh, I do not have chat open. I can see Zoom. 1 second, guys.
I can read it out if that helps.
Sorry, I just got it.
Okay.
Okay, any option of using middleware for auth, like we do in Node. So you do in Node, you'll have to, can you elaborate a little bit on an example? Are you saying like you would use an auth provider, or I guess I'm not sure what that question is. How do you handle Redux? Do you need Redux? So that's a big concern here, is that Redux has really kind of been evaporated in this build, in this architecture, because your global state is going to be server state now. So to manage your server state, you know, it's on the server and you just pull it down into your components when you need it. So I personally have not used Redux in a Remix application, but I have used Redux in several of Create React App and Vite applications. Question from, what's the advantage of using Remix over stuff like Express.js for fast API? So the advantage I would say for using Remix over things like Express.js is that you can co-locate your front-end code as well as your API code and your back-end code. Now, you could absolutely make the argument that you could do that with an Express.js server that you set up, and then you just locate your front-end code directly next to it. I really enjoy working with Remix. Why do I enjoy working with Remix? I would honestly have to think about what are some of the key components I enjoy working with Remix most. What's the main purpose of Remix? The main purpose of Remix is it's a full stack framework, right? So you can have your front and back end coexisting, and you really never have to leave that ecosystem to get to a production grade app, which I think is very convenient. I think Next.js's main purpose to host client files and serve as a web server to host front-end files. We usually use Express.js for the backend, APIs, and logic to send data. Is it similar to Remix? Are you advocating to use Remix to host both APIs and front-end files? You absolutely can. I'm not advocating for any specific architecture. I guess the point that I was saying is that when you go to spin up an Express server, you could absolutely spin up a Remix server, and it really does avoid a lot of the headache in terms of routing. So the file-based routing makes it a lot easier, not only to build, to initially spin up, but then to maintain. There's not, you know, a lot of my Express server experience, which albeit is limited, has been an index.js with a lot of different route endpoints that I would hit, and they're all their own little function, right? You grab a request, a request to this specific endpoint are sent, and then you run a function. I haven't written an Express server in quite a while. We use middleware. We use middleware in Node and Express to handle the auth token logic. What you did by calling a function. Yeah, I'm not sure at what scale you would need to look into middleware, or if you would. You know, we use middleware in Node and Express to handle the auth token logic. Right. Yeah, I don't have a great answer for you there. Go ahead. I apologize. What deployment services have I used with Remix? I've used Vercel, AWS, and Fly.io. So those are, AWS is pretty big. The process for all of them is really similar. Could you test end to end? Yes, yes, you definitely can test end to end. I use router and controller. Do you think it's possible to master any new UI library, as lately there are new libraries introduced? Which library will replace React completely in the next 5 years? Boy, if I had a crystal ball, I would certainly look into it and tell you. I don't think there's any way to know for sure what's going to be next. You can look at what's available and take a good guess. But I think they're all great too. And I think it's awesome that we have competition. Some folks get a little heated about what they think is right. I'm not in that camp. You know, I like Remix, but I also use Next.js. I don't think that the two have to be at war inevitably. I know middleware, I use a node for validation. I think that's it. Sorry, I will definitely look into your question, and I'm not sure if I'm saying your name correctly either, Rohit, about adding middleware and when I would need to add middleware. I'm trying to think of a use case. If I was using auth, I would just call. I don't think there would be a need for the middleware. You know, I would do all that logic would live in a .server file in my Remix repo in the project directory. You know, these are routes, right? But you can have code that lives anywhere in the app directory. And if it has a .server extension on it, it's only going to be server code when it does the code splitting. So you can maintain security with not exposing things like that to the front end. Using a middleware would remove the extracting the token and calling of this function in every endpoint. Okay. Okay. That sounds reasonable. Like I said, I'll definitely have to look into it. Was there any other questions? I think that was all I had. I don't know.
So is